I am so grateful for the grace of God. Hello, this is Brian, and thank you so much for clicking on this video. All throughout the Bible, we read scriptures about the grace of God. God's riches at Christ's expense, G-R-A-C-E. You see, grace is God's unmerited favor towards us. You can't be good enough for it. You can't buy it, but rather God's grace is freely given towards us all. We find God's saving grace, God's teaching grace, God's sustaining grace. Grace, grace, God's wonderful grace. I recall the words of Hebrews chapter 4, verse 16. And the Bible says, "Let us then with confidence draw near to the throne of grace, that we may receive mercy and find grace to help in time of need." That's what God's grace does for us. He helps us in time of need. All of us need the grace of God. And there are times in our life where it might seem as if we're just not going to make it. The Bible tells us in the book of Corinthians that when we are weak, then we're made strong, and that God's grace is sufficient. I'm sure you recognize the sufficient grace of God, going from one day to the next day. If it were not for the grace of God, none of us would be able to make it. I recall a story in the book of Zechariah, and the Bible says that Zerubbabel has started rebuilding the temple. And the Bible says the prophet gave a word to Zerubbabel, and he says in Zechariah chapter 4, as he begins the construction of this temple, he says, "It's not by might, it's not by power, but it's by my Spirit, saith the Lord." It is only by the Spirit of God that we can make it from one day to the next. And sometimes the task before us seems so huge, and it seems as if we're not going to make it. It might be a bad report from the doctor. It might be financial difficulty. It might be a situation in a relationship. But God reminds us to keep on keeping on. His sustaining grace. And the Bible says in that same chapter, in Zechariah chapter 4, that the prophet gives the instruction to Zerubbabel. He says, "Find the capstone or the headstone." And he says, "I want you to take it and I want you to hold it up and I want you to shout, 'Grace, grace,' to that capstone, to that headstone." You see, the headstone is the final piece of the puzzle when it came to rebuilding this temple. It was the completion of the project. And you see, whatever God starts, God will bring to completion. In fact, the Bible says in Philippians chapter 1, verse 6, that we can be confident in this very thing, that the God who's begun a good work in us will perform it. He will complete it until the day of Jesus Christ. And right now, you might be in a circumstance or a situation, and you say to yourself, "Well, I prayed before," but I believe once again that God is saying to you, just like He said to Zerubbabel, when he was discouraged and when he was down and he felt like there was no way for the completion of the rebuilding of the temple, He was saying to begin again. And I'm saying to you today, I believe with all my heart, God is saying to you to pray again. You say, "Brian, I prayed before," but pray again. Hope again, sing again, dream again, worship again. God is behind you. It's the sustaining grace of God. And I want to encourage you to bring that capstone. And that capstone is the person of Jesus Christ. In fact, the Bible tells us that that headstone, that capstone, was placed upon a cross. And it was on that cross that Jesus Christ cried the words in John 19:30, "It is finished." Jesus finished the work that His Father had given Him to do. And what must we do? We must look to the headstone. We must look to the capstone, which is Jesus Christ. And we must shout, "Grace, grace," knowing that God will supply. So whatever you're facing today, whatever you're going through, I want to encourage you to dream again, to pray again, to believe again, and trust God to bring to completion whatever you're trusting Him to do in your life. God is able. I know at times the devil tries to convince us that we're not going to make it. I encourage you today, whatever you're facing, to trust God and know that God will bring you through, trusting Him and believing Him that He will finish what He has started. To every mountain you face, every mountain of debt, every mountain of sickness, every mountain or problem you're facing right now, you believe God, that God will see you through. And you tell that sorry devil, "You can't stop me when God's grace is on me." So today, speak to your mountain. Don't let that mountain intimidate you, but rather remember that God, what He has started, He will bring to completion. Today, shout, grace, grace, God is going to supply.